how do you think a cultural historian would view the period which you studied? So from the 60s up until now, and all of the ideological and demographic shifts in the context of British history, what do you think they would say?
They'd probably call it Goodbye Britain. If you were writing a book about that, you'd say, cheerio Britain, goodbye Britain. I go through periods of fairly intense depression about it all, for all of the reasons I've just said. Actually, it's because it seems like we've got our heads down and we're running towards a brick wall. We're not going to stop, and the only way it seems as though things are going to change is after the catastrophe. In a way, that's what we do, isn't it? We see this in Europe now with the countries like Sweden and Denmark are saying, well, enough is enough. In Italy, enough is enough with unfettered immigration, because things have changed so quickly and there are so many people that we just cannot assimilate. We're going to have to do something about it after the catastrophes happened. What we're not very good at, especially in this country, is averting the catastrophe and not running into the brick wall. Having said that, so if I carry on with that imagery, then the historian of the future is going to say, well, things just collapsed and that was the end. That was the end of Britain, or that was the end of Britain for a time, and now it maybe things are beginning to get better, but there was a catastrophe. The Trump thing was extraordinary, I think. I was on I did the New Culture Forum podcast every week. We record it on the Thursday or either the Thursday or the Wednesday, and it goes out on the Saturday, and we all called it. Right, there were four of us: Peter Whittle, Rafe Hadelman-Q, Amy Gallagher, and myself, and we all called it. Right, we all said, "Well, Trump's going to win." Yeah. And the podcast with Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart definitely didn't call it. Okay, we called it because there are obvious signs that people are fed up with what's going on, fed up with the mental health crisis that is extreme left-wing thinking, which has now become the mainstream. Okay, and we see the mental health crisis in the Trump derangement syndrome, the meltdowns of what's happening. You've seen it on Twitter. The liberals going absolutely berserk because Trump's won. People are looking at that and they are thinking, one, we're sick of it, we're fed up of it, but two, we don't want it for our children and our grandchildren, right? And you mentioned Connor Tomlinson before. I think there's a new breed of young, tough, often male, actually, very turned on, very intelligent, political people, not just commentators, but people who are very definitely pushing back on this in terms of lifestyle, but also in terms of ideas and all the rest of it. So I'm seeing glimmers of hope, and I think the Trump thing is much more than a glimmer of hope. It was huge. It was a landslide in American terms. It was enormous. It was a complete negation of all of those things. Now, if some of that can come our way, even if it's only some of that, then we might be looking at a much rosier picture than we think we're seeing at the moment. That said, and I'm really kind of, I'm not very one way or the other here around it, but that said, I'm still looking at anti-Semitic hate marches every Saturday in big cities like Leeds and London and Manchester. Okay, I'm still seeing that kind of worrying, very alien to us, anti-Britishness, which we've already talked about, but which seems to be growing and growing. I suppose demographics is part of that. So I'm very worried that mindset is just going to be more entrenched and grow and grow and grow. But at least we're beginning to fight back against it. We got 5 reform. Is it 5? We got 5 reform MPs, haven't we? And we were talking about reform before. That is a good sign, but reform are by no means perfect. Okay, but there are other parties like the SDP which I wish people would know more about. Okay, there is an alternative. There is a sense of fight back. It is sensible. It is really sensible, and I think people are really crying out for something that makes sense, something that isn't lived experience of I feel like a woman today, therefore I am a woman today, even though I've got a beard, right? That kind of thing. So I think there is a fight back. The question is how successful is that going to be? I still think we've got to have much more crisis, much more fear. We've got to be collectively frightened that we are going to lose something before things get better. But, and I have to say this because I need something to cling to, I think things will get better.
I think you might be right, only because in my own circles and those in my concentric circles who would have typically, I think, not found themselves around this type of conversation before, are starting to have them in some way. And the sense of loss you were talking about needing to be felt deep within the psyche before there's perhaps a decisive shift in the opposite direction, whatever that may look like. I do think it's starting to happen partly because security is clearly becoming a watchword, and we've just had the Remembrance Sunday weekend, and indeed we're recording today on Armistice Day, and I went to a service on the Royal Mile in Edinburgh. I live in Edinburgh at the moment, and potentially we'll move back to the glorious lands of England next year, but for the time being, resident in Edinburgh. And the service was lovely. There was an orchestra with a brass band. It was all the military processing down from the castle, and a real sense of occasion, very solemn. The national anthem was going. South Africa was in town for the rugby. They were all wearing their poppies. It felt like the Commonwealth in arms, like people could recognize that actually we are cousins. They're not just a random nation. And so there was a sense of solidarity, at least amongst the core, but it was tempered quite badly by there being a few shifty characters in the crowd, which startled a few of the people that I was with, and they didn't want to stand near the crowd. They wanted to get away because they were afraid that something bad was going to happen. And it was that moment where we'd gone to celebrate in some way the fact that we were all together, remembering the sacrifices made to keep whatever civilization and whatever fumes of civilization they were fighting for alive so we could enjoy them. And it was totally put in the shadows by the insecurity felt. And it was that moment, that realization for people who usually want to avoid this conversation, who now know we live in a low trust society and it was never that way. And I think once that gets into people's heads, fear is a big driver. And you can see it in the political commentary, even amongst the liberal commentariat. You can find it amongst the Matthew Syeds of the Times talking about ending identity politics, stop trashing European culture and celebrate it, stop mass immigration. This is pure centrist area, and it's becoming more and more. So I think I've been like you. I've been heavily depressed about the trajectory of my country. I used to be one of these dyed-in-the-wool progressive types. In fact, when I got my first job in financial services, because I'd read a bit of Noam Chomsky and some Che Guevara, I decided that I should get to the top of the system and bring it all down. I didn't really know anything about my history either, and it wasn't much later on until I started to feel rootless, and I got into it and realized that actually we aren't just a malign force in the world, that everything changed. And particularly as I saw things changing around me in the cities, and I thought, I don't like this at all. So I think that seems to be coming now to a much wider purview of people than I don't think we would have expected. And I suppose we'll see how it develops.